Coming up on Network Africa, Ethiopia's new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, unveils his cabinet. Striking nurses in Zimbabwe dismiss their mass sack as illegal, vow to continue industrial action. And a South African lobby group says it will prosecute opposition leader Julius Malema on allegations of corruption and fraud. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Temitope Fagbemi. We begin today in East Africa, where Ethiopia's new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has unveiled his cabinet. Mr. Ahmed announced on state television that he had reshuffled 6 ministers and introduced 10 more. He moved the former mining minister to the role of defense minister and kept the finance and foreign ministers in their roles. The Prime Minister has requested Parliament to ratify the change, but as everyone in Parliament is from the ruling coalition, observers say it is expected to go through. So let's get more on this story from Dr. Augustine Agugwa, a lecturer at the University of Lagos and an African Affairs analyst. Thanks for joining us on the program.
It's my pleasure.
So what do you make of the cabinet reshuffle by Ethiopia's new Prime Minister?
The good thing about it, and we just have to be a little precise on this, there is something that actually took place from point of view of engaging people that were of the former administration. And that is the news, and not just the issue of cabinet reshufflement, because it happens virtually in every African nation. And I really found that very interesting. I found it something one we describe from point of view of continuity, because one thing we really lack the capacity to actually hold on to in this part of the world is the ability to actually see something good in the past administration. But this man, I think, is trying to create a kind of impression that all is not totally bad in Africa. Sometimes we actually have values which ought to be cherished, which ought to be appreciated, and which ought to be maintained.
But what does this say of the Prime Minister's promise of political reform if it's continuing with his, more or less continuing with his predecessor's cabinet?
Well, if you take it from that angle, well, reform and change, you know, is something that waxes and wanes. It operates on a continuum. It doesn't have to do with the fact that there should be a total obliteration of what used to be. Because in our definition of what is good and bad, my understanding of it is that in every situation, you can't actually define something as terribly bad or wonderfully good. There is always something to get from point of view of these positive values in respect of what has been. And I've always had this notion that a major problem we have in Africa is that once some people come on board, they want to give the impression that all what that have been in existence was in a terrible state of morals. That is not so.
But is that only in Africa?
No,
I mean,
see,
U.S. President Donald Trump, isn't he doing the same thing?
Well, to a reasonable extent, U.S. President, fine and good, did the same thing because it's a human affair. But I'm looking at it from point of view of something that is, to a reasonable extent, more on our side. Because the same U.S. you're making reference to. Some time ago, I think, when in Obama's first coming, I think his defense secretary happened to be somebody from the Republican Party that was there before he came on board. That is part of it. And I was trying to actually make the point that that is a kind of inspiration that's played out in what the man from Ethiopia is doing, and we should actually give him kudos. Because we are talking about reshufflement of 6 ministers and then 10. Out of these 10 reshuffled ministers, the only continuity you can actually see there has to do with 2 major ministers. Am I communicating?
Yes. From
point of view of the foreign minister and the other person. That might have to do with the fact that he found them competent. You know, we have this notion that when I take over, from point of view of this attitude of spoil system, what was in existence is terribly bad. It doesn't give room for continuity because, for goodness sake, there are situations where people had demonstrated capability and reasonable capacity. You have to tap into their strength. You have to actually put them on a pedestal to reproduce and replicate that which they have been doing. And it's just like one slogan that was associated with our former president, Obasanjo, that sometimes you don't need to, change a winning team. And that sentiment, I think it played out in this case, and I think it's something that should be commended instead of being condemned.
Now, the Prime Minister has pledged to address grievances in his native Oromia region, the center of violent unrest. Yeah. How easy will it be for him to deliver on this promise?
Well, the good thing about it is that this is somebody coming from a region that was seen to be restive, right? So they say he who wears a shoe knows where it pinches. And let me tell you, the Nigerian example this time, if we should be doing comparative analysis of situations and circumstances, is what we experienced during the days of late President Yar'Adua's government and his then Vice President, former President Jonathan, right? When President Yar'Adua took on the mantle of leadership, the Niger Delta was terribly restive. All what late President Yar'Adua did was to dispatch Jonathan to go to their area and make sure your people are kept under control. And by God's grace, I will say that to a reasonable extent, he was able to achieve that with then Vice President Jonathan. Now, you are looking at a situation whereby somebody from that kind of region is now totally in charge. The question you ask yourself now is this: why are these people restive? Why is that state of unrest the way it is? It might have to do with a sense of marginalization. And now he is in a position as the new prime minister to enact rules, enact principles, initiate policies that will set in motion issues that border on inclusiveness. Because the major thing that actually set people on the war path is that sense of exclusionism. And where it takes place, people get offended. It's to that extent you will also see that one of the reasons why former President Jonathan emerged as the president of Nigeria might even have been to placate the people of the Niger Delta. Remember the June 12 saga in the case of late Chief MKO Abiola. The emergence of President Obasanjo was to douse the tension in the southwest, and I think it was able to achieve that very objective. So I see the same thing playing out in the case of the emergence of the Prime Minister in Ethiopia recently.
Dr. Augustine Agugwa, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you so much.
Nurses in Zimbabwe have continued their strike over pay despite the government directive announcing their sack. The nurses went on strike on Monday to press demands for the payment of allowances and to protest about new pay grades. But a spokesman for President Emmerson Mnangagwa says the government is recruiting unemployed nurses and recalling retired nurses below the age of 70 who are willing to work. He also says nurses who were sacked could apply for posts as new employees. However, Enoch Dongo, Secretary General of the Zimbabwe Nursing Association, says the sackings violates the country's labor laws and the strike will continue.